Greg Siekaniec. I'm glad you all made it up here to join us. And I'll be making some introductions here. This workshop on strategic planning between the service and the state agencies, and appropriately so, is a key focus for us that we need to be thinking about. State and federal agencies recognize, as I said this morning, we have a shared authority and responsibility for the management of fish and wildlife on national wildlife refuges. The service across the country works fairly closely with states. I actually think they work very closely with states most of the time. And as I said also this morning, I think it was Sam Hamilton that brought us, really there should be no daylight between us when it comes to wildlife conservation in this country. It's important to both of us. So our working relationship, I believe, is grounded not only in mutual respect, but it is simply essential if conservation is to be effective everywhere throughout the United States. So we have to build on this important relationship. I think there's times we need to widen our perspectives, consider the impacts of our actions on species that don't recognize jurisdictional lines. And toss that all into the concept and operation of things we are throwing out there from an agency such as landscape conservation cooperatives. These organizations bring specific capacity so that we can do a better job of biological planning and conservation and design, but yet we also understand that the states are often tasked with their own programs, and for them to step up and do something every time a federal agency starts to initiate a new action, pretty quickly we can complicate their life and their world. So the relationships we have are extremely important to make sure that we can be successful at conservation in the long run. So to explore this subject and kind of where we are, how we can do a better job for wildlife, is there ways we could be more strategic? Is there planning things that we need to be thinking about cooperatively? We have an outstanding group of panelists. John Kennedy, Deputy Director, we heard from him this morning, Deputy Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. He's been an outstanding member of our vision process. He has been engaged. He's developed a good relationship, I know, with certainly Cynthia Martinez from, sort of helping, make sure John was aware of all the things that were going on, and John did a great job of providing us good feedback in a very timely manner. John currently chairs the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Federal and Tribal Relations Committee, and he holds a master's degree in wildlife management from South Dakota State University. And sitting to the left of John is Steve Weber, Chief of the Wildlife for New Hampshire Fish and Game Department. During his 30-year career, he has worked in various positions in northern New England and the Adirondack Mountains of northern New York. Steve serves as the Vice Chair of the Federal and Tribal Relations Committee and has been involved with planning and implementation on several national wildlife refuges. Steve has a degree in wildlife management from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point and a master's degree in wildlife ecology from the University of New Hampshire. So you're kind of home for a little bit here. All right. And let's see, down there on my far right, Robin West. Robin, he has a storied career in the refuge system, and believe me, I've heard some of the stories. Just this year, Robin was named Refuge Chief for the Pacific region, responsible for nearly 70 national wildlife refuges in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands and territories. Robin first moved to the service's Portland, Oregon regional office in 2009 to become a refuge supervisor, and before that, he really had his hands in the dirt, working 14 years as the refuge manager at Kenai Refuge in Alaska. And last, but certainly not least, Mr. Geoffrey Haskett. Actually, Geoff is my predecessor as chief of the refuge system, having acted in the position for more than 3 years before he moved up. Where'd you move up to? I mean, literally, geographically, he moved way north. He's the regional director in Alaska. Geoff is responsible for everything that goes on in that great state. Actually, that should be everything that goes on in the Great Land, including nearly 77 million acres of refuge lands. Geoff also has one of those storied careers in the Fish and Wildlife Service. He has worked in the Northwest, Southwest, Southeast, but he had to do remedial in Washington, D.C. He was there twice. So with that, that's our panelists, and I'm just going to get out of the way right now and turn it over to John.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you, everybody, for attending this workshop. One of the, I was lucky enough, those that heard me talk this morning know that I was lucky enough to represent the states on the Vision Process Steering Committee. We've enjoyed a really good relationship with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and on behalf of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, I was able to participate on that steering committee the best that I could. And Greg is right that I did need a lot of help from Rebecca and Cynthia. I was extremely high demand on that whole process, and I apologize about that to the Fish and Wildlife Service. It was hard to keep up with them. I'll tell you that, you know, and I don't need to tell the Fish and Wildlife Service this because you know your own employees better than I do, but talk about a very committed and dedicated group of people on that steering committee and those core teams. I was very impressed and felt proud to be a part of that. Some of the flexibility that I was afforded as being on the steering committee was providing some input as to the types of workshops and some of the facilitated discussions that take place this week. And looking over the draft schedule for this conference, we noticed, or I noticed at least, quite a few workshops focused on strategic planning and cooperative work with others besides the states. And it seemed appropriate to me to talk about what I call a new way of doing business and the great cooperative relationship we have with the Fish and Wildlife Service. I thought it would be good to have a workshop focused on that. My expectations with respect to this workshop are not all that intense. I just wanted to talk about some of the good things that we've done in the last several years and talk about a process and a relationship that we have in place right now so that we all know about it. A lot of our new, both Fish and Wildlife Service and state Fish and Wildlife agencies, a lot of our new employees don't know these things that we're discussing at this conference. They don't know about the North American Wildlife Conservation Model. They don't know about state and federal authorities and responsibilities. And they certainly don't know about the relationship and the important partnership that the states have with Fish and Wildlife Service. So I thought we would just get that out so that everybody understands that and we could talk about it a little bit. Those are my expectations. And then Steve Weber, as Greg said, is the vice chair of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Federal and Tribal Relations Committee. And I'm hoping my comments kind of go right into a good start for Steve to talk about some partnerships in his state. What I've done is I took a lot of notes that I wanted to talk about. I'm going to cut this way down just so that I can get off of here and we can hear from more people and from you, which is most important. I did highlight some key comments, though, I want to make. So I'll run down through this very quickly. I'm trying not to be redundant with comments that I provided this morning, so I'll try not to do that. But our involvement in this vision process steering committee and our input on the vision document, and for sure this workshop is really important to us, and it seems appropriate given that the states, along with the service, and under certain circumstances, the Native American tribes are the only entities in the United States with legal authority for fish and wildlife conservation. So this is an appropriate issue to discuss and to make sure our employees understand. Our role and perspectives are also appropriate and important given the fact that the National Wildlife Refuge System Improvement Act in its legislative history provides clear congressional direction in terms of what we're going to be talking about. And I won't go into all of that I talked about this morning. During the last several years, state agency members of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Federal and Tribal Relations Committee have worked closely with the service rather formally, and this started in 2002. Thanks to Greg and others, and Dan, and at the time Director Steve Williams, and Jim Kurth and others. Geoff has helped as well, and I appreciate that. We actually entered into Intergovernmental Personnel Act agreements, so the states were essentially service employees for a while, and we traveled to DC at least once a month and to other locations to work with the service collaboratively from the very beginning on refuge policies. Certainly back in 2002, that sent a very strong message to everyone, including the states, that the service is committed to working with us. And as I said this morning, the states are very much committed to working with the service too. But that's a special relationship, and it's a relationship I don't think our employees necessarily understand. And that's one we want to continue, and that's a relationship I wanted to talk about today. So at that time in 2002, we completed the Mission Goals and Purposes Policy, Appropriate Refuge Uses Policy, Wildlife Dependent Recreational Uses Policy, and after a very long time, the wilderness stewardship policy. Also, in a policy that I think I touched on this morning is a policy on coordination and cooperative work with state fish and wildlife agencies. That's 601 FW7. That's the most important part of this workshop in my mind. If you take nothing else from this workshop, I'd hope that if you haven't read that policy, you will. It's very important to us for sure. And it formalizes this joint responsibilities and authorities and just gets that off the table so our troops on the ground aren't getting in any type of jurisdictional debates. That's one thing that was very important for us as we move forward. So we think that policy, the states and the service leadership think that policy provides a really good framework for working cooperatively on the ground. And we're very proud that we were able to work on that policy with the service, and the states are very proud that we have that policy. And there's a lot of pride in ownership or authorship of that policy with the service, and that's why you may see pretty firm positions from the service, from the states, in terms of that relationship we have with Fish and Wildlife Service. Again, that's formalized in that policy. In talking with service employees at this conference and in talking with state employees at some of our larger conferences we have, very few know about that policy. I'm not sure, Greg, Geoff, if there's something we can do in that regard to just educate our employees, but that may be something that's worth discussing today because, again, I think it provides good direction at the national level for our troops on the ground, which is really where everything happens, as you know. So pursuant to that policy, we have clear guidance for strategic planning and cooperative work between the states and the service for managing fish, wildlife, and their habitats on refuges. That strategic planning through that policy that was initiated in 2002 is a relationship that I hope that we can continue during implementation of this vision document. So there's kind of the tie with where we've been since 2002 to today, and the states and Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies respectfully would request that we be able to continue that relationship with service, with Fish and Wildlife Service, and at this point, service leadership's been very positive about that relationship, but I can let them talk about that. That level of cooperation, again, government-to-government relationship should continue as we move forward with implementation of the vision document. We're not sure what that means necessarily. We're not sure what implementation is going to look like, but we're going to be talking a lot about that. Well, some discussions today and some tomorrow. That relationship between the service and the states helps us overcome some very important challenges in terms of developing refuge policies and plans that both agencies can support, both at the national level and the local level. Those challenges include ensuring refuges are administered for the conservation, management, and where appropriate, restoration of fish, wildlife, and their habitats, ensuring that policies, plans, and projects support refuge purposes, ensuring that wildlife-dependent recreational uses, certainly hunting and fishing, are considered priority general public uses of the refuge system. I mentioned eliminating state, federal jurisdictional debates. Close coordination and cooperative work at the national level, I think, will help to resolve those challenges. And last, more at the local level, we need to establish and maintain strong trust relationships and partnerships. Successful Fish and Wildlife Service, State Wildlife Agency partnerships, and there are many, can be found in those states, regions, and refuges where our agencies have taken time to develop trust relationships and meaningful partnerships. And I'm not meaning to sound fluffy about this, but we often don't just sit down and build relationships first. We come right to the table and start to negotiate. And without a trust relationship between the service and the states, those fail. So I think we're going to hear more about the importance of those partnerships at the local level during Steve. So with that, I just want to thank the service again for involving the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies in this vision process. Thanks to all of you for attending this workshop. It's important to us, and we want to just move on with presentations and then of all of us, and then we'll take questions or comments. So with that, I'll turn this over to Mr. Weber. I didn't call you Stephen.
I appreciate that. Thank you, John. And I'd also like to thank the Fish and Wildlife Service for the opportunity to talk with you this afternoon. And I feel very fortunate that I'm able to give a couple of examples, local examples of how the relationship, the partnership between the Fish and Wildlife Service and at least the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department in our state has worked and has worked very well. I'm going to try not to bore you too much with a few slides, but they help me to keep my notes straight as I go through these. How it works in New Hampshire. New Hampshire is a small state. It's kind of sandwiched way up in the northeastern corner of the country between Maine and Vermont. In fact, a lot of people, if they're not from the Northeast, think we are Maine or Vermont. But I can guarantee you we're not. We're a very independent little state. Even though we're small, 1.3 million people, we got the third largest legislature on the face of the planet. We got 400 representatives and 24 senators and 5 elected council members who oversee the recommendations of the governor, if you can believe it. It is a system of government that goes back to 1742. So it's a very interesting place to work. We have no sales tax, we have no income tax, which means we have no money. This whole thing with budget problems and budget stress and that's the way we've been doing business for a very long time. And that has its positive aspects to it as well. You learn to work with others if you want to get anything done. That said, even though we only have 1.3 million people, there's 20 million people within an 8-hour drive in New Hampshire. So there's a lot of pressure put on our resources being in that location. The Pew Center, this is just one more little thing that's in the way of actually getting work done. The Pew Center recently did a review of all 50 states and found New Hampshire had the lowest efficiency of 50 states. We were ranked number 50. So there are some real challenges to getting conservation work done in New Hampshire, yet 30% of the land base in New Hampshire is in some form of conservation ownership. We've got one national forest, I don't know if you can see that in the center of the state there. We've got a couple of moderately sized national wildlife refuges that are in the process of growing, but there's a lot of individual partnerships and there's a lot of conservation lands on that map that don't show up very well that represent a tremendous collaboration between the state, the federal government, and a number of non-governmental organizations in the state that have been highly successful in protecting lands in the state. What makes it work in New Hampshire? Obviously, we've got strong partnerships with state, federal, and private organizations, coordination and cooperation at the local, regional, and statewide levels, respect for differing missions and approaches, and one thing that's really important here is understanding and valuing those differences. We tend to look at the differences as different opportunities to succeed. If you get hung up on the differences between the missions of different organizations, you're not going to be successful in taking advantage of all the opportunities that are presented to you. So that's a really important key, is understanding and valuing those differences. And then, like John said, trust through many, many years of working together. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to work at it, and we think we've done a pretty good job of that. What does it mean? Well, for state agencies, it means that we don't always get everything we might want when we're managing in the management of non-state lands. That's just the way it is. Other people have different missions, and without that compromise, progress is really retarded. For federal agencies, it means oftentimes that they include things that they might not be very comfortable with. And again, that's that give and take aspect of things. And for private land trusts and non-governmental organizations, it means working with others to conserve more lands than they could ever do alone. You just can't do anything without partnerships these days in the form of land conservation. So it's extremely important. I'd like to go through just a couple of examples specific to national wildlife refuges. The Umbagog National Wildlife Refuge up in the northeastern corner of the state. When that refuge was formed, the land that it was formed on, hunting and hunting with dogs, was a very ingrained and long-standing tradition on the refuge. For a variety of reasons, we were not able to get dog hunting for all species put on the refuge. So we got what we could get in terms of the use of dogs on the refuge. They're allowed for upland game hunting and for hunting snowshoe hare. but they're not allowed for bear or for fur bears, which was a long-standing tradition in the area, and many of the local residents were very upset with that. They've come to accept it as not that bad a thing at this point in time. On the other side of that, the refuge hunt plan was done first. The refuge was never closed to hunting when it was created. So those lands that have been added to the refuge since then have always been open to hunting under the existing plan. The plan's been modified a couple times, but that's a give back that the service was able to do. They were able to put that hunt plan in immediately and never close the refuge to hunting. The service also was able to accept a snowmobile corridor through the refuge, which may or may not have, I mean, it was right on the edge of whether it was a compatible use or not. Normally, it probably wouldn't have been allowed. In this case, it was, because it was a established traditional use of the area that was maintained when the refuge was taken over. What's it got in the refuge system in the process of doing that? Broad-based public support for refuge expansion and the realization by the public that the best way to keep things the way they want them, which is essentially to keep them the same, is through the refuge. Just an example of how that's worked out, the refuge was established in 1992 with the purchase of 128 acres. By 1996, it was 6,358 acres. Today, we're kind of backing out here in terms of the scale of the map here. It's over 21,000 acres, and the recently completed CCP has an approved boundary of almost 48,000 acres. So without the public support, that probably wouldn't have been possible. So it has certainly worked out well for that refuge. One other quick example, the Siekaniec National Wildlife Refuge. It's a very unique refuge. The refuge boundary is the watershed for the Connecticut River, which forms the boundary between Vermont and New Hampshire and also cuts a wide swath through Massachusetts and Connecticut. It's a huge area. In order to deal with planning on that refuge, we've adopted a unique approach using conservation partnership areas and conservation focus areas, where within the partnership areas, those are areas where the refuge has agreed to work with other partners to move the issues of conservation forward. The conservation focus areas are actually areas where there will be active management on the part of the refuge. What does that get us? It gets us with everybody coming to the table. These areas are identified. They represent a shared set of priorities that incorporates the priorities of state and federal agencies, non-governmental organizations, and they create linkages and corridors. In the words of Andy French, who's the refuge manager there, it's our goal to facilitate connectivity in area, elevation, latitude, and aspect in an effort to promote diversity, redundancy, and resiliency within the expanding network of conservation land. In support of the refuge legislated purposes, our trust responsibilities, and state wildlife action plans. State wildlife action plans are right there, and we'll hear about those a little bit more in just a minute. Just to give you a sense of the scale of the Siekaniec Refuge, there's two states on that map, and the Siekaniec is that swath down the middle, obviously, with the Connecticut River, and like I said, it cuts a wide swath through Massachusetts and Connecticut as well. Why it works? It works because organizations don't gravitate towards the extremes. We live in a world with a lot of people, and all those people have different expectations. And as public employees, it really is incumbent on us to try to do as much as we can to satisfy those desires as we can while staying within the confines of our mission. But we have to do whatever we can, wherever we can. How it works? Partnership, obviously. To have a good partner, you have to be a good partner. And I can't overemphasize that enough. If you're not willing to be a good partner, you're probably not going to have a good partner across the table from you. Individuals absolutely make a difference. We all have the responsibility for making these partnerships work. Somebody's got to go first. Somebody's got to be courageous enough to lay out what they honestly expect and be courageous enough to back away and compromise when it's the best path forward. And finally, trust. This is no different than any other relationship. We simply have to have trust or it is not going to work. And that comes through a lot of hard work to get there. Just one quick advertisement here at the end of this about state wildlife action plans. How I think the refuge visioning document could be improved would be to have a more direct link between the visioning document and the state wildlife action plans. These action plans are for the entire state. They're inclusive of refuge lands. They have already identified priority species habitats and actions throughout the states. They already have a plan for monitoring the condition of species and effectiveness of conservation actions, and they are already incorporating a climate change adaptation strategy. I know that state fish and wildlife agencies sometimes are looked at primarily as advocates for hunting and fishing, consumptive uses. We're a whole lot more than that. And I know most of the people in the room here know that, and I just would like to see that visioning document make a little more specific mention and reference to the state wildlife action plans. We put an awful lot of work into those. They are truly working on the ground, and they ought to be incorporated by reference in that planning document. So with that, who's going next?
Robin.
Robin.
Thank you.
Well, normally I like to use a PowerPoint because I can kind of hide behind it and people don't look at me, but I'm trying something different today. I work from notes. Also like to know my audience, and although there's a varied audience here, this is mostly for refuge managers, what I'm going to talk about. There's many examples of successful state and federal partnerships for planning and implementation of fish and wildlife conservation efforts. And I know I probably would not have to look too far for examples of those that have failed too. I could tease out the elements of these successes and failures and speak to that, but I won't. Instead, I want to do something a little different and delve deeper, perhaps to the root of conflict that seems to surface and taint relationships and ultimately conservation successes, seemingly still too often. I know we're not beyond that because I see it. I will spend some time with this and then we'll close with an observation or two and a bit of a challenge. And I'm going to start near the beginning, really, with the very birth pangs of our nation. The Federalist Papers were rather lengthy and well-crafted documents that defended the idea of a stronger national government in support of the proposed new Constitution. These arguments were authored by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, and published in New York City newspapers in 1787. Hamilton, early in his first thesis, wrote, "Among the most formidable of the obstacles which the new Constitution will have to encounter may readily be distinguished the obvious interest of a certain class of men in every state to resist all changes which may hazard a diminution of power, emolument and consequence of the office they hold under state establishments, and the perverted ambition of another class of men who will either hope to aggrandize themselves by the confusion of their country or will flatter themselves with fair prospects of elevation from the subdivision of the empire into several partial confederacies that from its union under one government." Well, I don't know everything that means. I know that's what my English professor would call a run-on sentence, but it sounds like fighting words to me. And indeed, Hamilton would later lose his life in 1804 with a duel with Aaron Burr, who was a long-time outspoken political rival and had a strong anti-federalist bent. And while the Federalist Papers are relatively well known, counter-arguments in the early constitutional debates were equally prevalent, labeled the Anti-Federalist Papers. These dissenting opinions were penned by statesmen such as Patrick Henry and John DeWitt, who saw the Constitution as whittling away the rights so recently gained from England. Patrick Henry writes on June 7, 1788, "This Constitution is said to have beautiful features, but when I come to examine these features, sir, they appear to me horridly frightful. Among other deformities, it has an awful squinting. It squints towards monarchy. And does not this raise indignation in the breast of every American? Your president may easily become king. Your Senate is so imperfectly constructed that your dearest rights may be sacrificed, but may be a small minority, and the very small minority may continue forever, unchangeably, this government, although horridly defective. Where are your checks in this government? So although the Anti-Federalists lost the debate and that the new Constitution was ultimately ratified and the original states turned over much power to a new central government, they almost won in all appearance, and the tension between Anti-Federalists and Federalist principles in many ways has done a little to wane over the last 200 plus years. And I believe much of this seeming ongoing tension between some aspects of the federal government and some states at times come from some of the basic tenets of these historic debates that manifest themselves today. To illustrate, I'm going to use some arguments that are made up, but they could be real. It'll be a debate with myself, so I cannot lose. It'll be a potential state position and a potential federal response specific to fish and wildlife management, and as much as possible more specific to management of national wildlife refuges. As you listen for a few minutes, think about how it makes you feel, because I'm going to come back to that. Okay, I'll start with a potential state argument. The Constitution of the United States grants broad authority to the federal government, but does not mention management of fish and wildlife. The 10th Amendment of the Constitution states that the power is not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states or reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Our conclusion, therefore, is that the Founding Fathers intended fish and wildlife management to be held by the states in common trust for the people. Potential federal response. It is true that the Founding Fathers crafted no specific language regarding fish and wildlife management, but they did create processes and legislative authorities that allowed for federal management to legitimately develop. In over a century of case law decisions on this topic, the courts have consistently ruled that the federal government may develop regulations consistent with laws intended to protect natural interests, to name a few, that may include land, water, cultural and historic features, and living creatures. These powers came from the constitutional authorities to enter into and enforce treaties and with other governments, regulate aspects of interstate commerce, and to create all needful regulations to protect national interests under the broad powers of the Property Clause. Potential state argument. We understand the premise of federal oversight of migratory birds and perhaps other wildlife that regularly move between international boundaries, but resident fish and wildlife are solely under state jurisdiction. Potential federal response. Congress, in passing the National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act of 1966 and further amendments, directed the Secretary of the Interior through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the refuge system as a national network of lands and waters, to allow uses that are compatible with the purposes of the refuge and the mission of the system, ensure the biological integrity, diversity, and environmental health of the system are maintained, and provide for the conservation of fish and wildlife and plants and their habitats within the system where fish and wildlife are defined to mean any wild member of the animal kingdom, whether alive or dead, and regardless of whether the member was bred, hatched, or born in captivity, including a part, product, egg, or offspring of the member. Congress clearly intended for all fish and wildlife, including resident species, to be part of the conservation mandate of the National Wildlife Refuge System. Potential state argument. The National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act also states, nothing in this act shall be construed as affecting the authority, jurisdiction, or responsibility of the several states to manage, control, or regulate fish and wildlife, resident fish and wildlife under state law or regulations in any area within the system. Congressional intent for the states to manage resident fish and wildlife, even with the passage of the Administration Act, is apparent. Potential federal response. This portion of one of the savings clauses in the Act states that the Act doesn't affect the authority, jurisdiction, or responsibilities of the states. It doesn't define what that authority is. In fact, the rest of the clause goes on to read, regulations permitting hunting or fishing of fish and resident wildlife within the system shall be, to the extent practicable, consistent with state fish and wildlife laws, regulations, and management plans. This is strong direction to federal refuge managers to work with states to implement consistent rules wherever reasonable, but cannot be interpreted in a way that has the final authority resting with the state. Potential state argument. The strong wording to implement state laws, regulations, and plans to the extent practicable would seem to severely limit straying from this guideline. When, for example, would the federal government ever find the need to protect a non-threatened resident species beyond that of state protection? Or for that matter, when would the federal government open a season to take a resident game animal in opposition to state regulations? Potential federal response. While we admit that both examples should be exceedingly rare, they have both occurred historically on other federal lands and have been subject to judicial review. For example, in Kleppe versus New Mexico, the Supreme Court ruled that the New Mexico Livestock Board acted improperly when they entered public lands of the United States and removed wild burros in violation of the Wild Free-Ranging Horse and Burro Act. And on similar matter, in Hunt versus U.S., the court ruled that the state of Arizona interfered with legal acts of the United States officials who were removing deer that were overbrowsing the Kaibab National Forest and Grand Canyon National Game Preserve, though the removal was occurring outside of state seasons and bag limit restrictions. These rulings clearly indicate that the federal government may act to either protect or remove resident animals from federal lands for cause, even if outside guidelines of the states. Almost done. Potential state argument. Those are some pretty unique examples, but day-to-day management should concede that state management objectives almost always have more reach and effect than refuge-specific regulations. Deference should almost always be given to the states if state regulations and refuge-specific regulations are in conflict. Potential federal response. National wildlife refuges have specific mandates and purposes. Rules necessary to achieve them should always be coordinated with effective states, should be consistent with state rules and plans as much as practicable, but could ultimately differ for a variety of reasons. For example, implementation of weapons restrictions around refuge facilities during a hunting season may be necessary to ensure public safety, even though areas surrounding the refuge have no such regulation or need. If there ever is true conflict between state and federal regulations preempt the state under supremacy clause of the Constitution. Now I'm going to stop my debate with myself and come back to you and ask, how did that make you feel? Confused? Wanting to know more? Angry? Thinking the court's got it wrong? Thinking right on? Maybe a little bit all of that? You shouldn't worry about it. We do, too much. I hear these conversations at various levels, over coffee, when we're doing planning, when things aren't going right, have for years. It's true, we all need to have a good understanding of the sideboards of our jurisdiction. However, I contend it is far more important that we work together on coordinated conservation efforts than spending precious time, money, and energy fighting over who is in charge. In the context of what I've been presenting, the bottom line in my words really is the feds almost always have the power on federal lands, but should almost never use it. Make no mistake, unless there is exclusive jurisdiction, which is exceedingly rare in the National Wildlife Refuge system, states have diverse and far-reaching authorities that overlay refuges. So why, with dual authorities, you might ask, would I conclude federal preemption should be uncommonly rare? I'll give you 5 reasons. Reason 1, the law. Not only does the National Wildlife Refuge System Administration Act have strongly worded savings clause that directs refuge regulations permitting hunting and fishing to be consistent with state regulations and management plans to the maximum degree practicable, it also directs effective coordination, interaction, cooperation with state fish and wildlife agencies in administering refuges, timely and effective cooperation during the course of acquiring and managing refuges, and consultation, coordination, and developing or modifying management plans. Reason 2, regulations. 43 CFR Part 24 codifies the Department of Interior Fish and Wildlife policy on state and federal relationships, and this directs federal agencies within the department to prepare fish and wildlife management plans in cooperation with states, work to institute habitat management practices to accomplish state fish and wildlife resource plan objectives where possible, provide for public use of federal lands in accordance with both state and federal laws, and consult with states in carrying out research, reintroductions, and removal of fish and wildlife. Reason 3, policies. We got lots of them. The Fish and Wildlife Service has policies requiring consultation and collaboration with the states for preparing comprehensive conservation plans, for developing hunting and fishing programs, and for general coordination. 605 FW7, coordination and cooperative work with state fish and wildlife agencies, acknowledges the unique expertise and role of state fish and wildlife agencies in management of fish and wildlife, and that both the service and state agencies have authorities and responsibilities for fish and wildlife management. This policy clearly points out that state fish and wildlife agencies are not just another interested public and are to be involved in refuge management planning activities, from proposed acquisition of new refuge lands to the implementation of management activities that affect fish and wildlife over time. Reason 4, common sense. It's rare that federal conservation objectives can be solely accomplished on just federal lands. Only working broadly with states and private landowners can large conservation challenges hope to be adequately addressed. Additionally, only on the very largest refuges do the bulk of resident wildlife species reside their entire lives. And a related thought, I understand that one of the biggest challenges we have for effective refuge management can be in holdings that are managed with different objectives within our refuge boundaries. Our strategy is frequently to try and acquire them whenever we can. We should remember that from the state's perspective, refuges are just giant in-holdings. We should work diligently to cooperate in our management actions so that their feelings aren't the same as ours, if you will, try and buy us out. Reason 5, more common sense. The conservation challenges we collectively face are too great and the workers too few for us to fight amongst ourselves. In closing, I'll repeat. Conservation challenges we collectively face are too great and the workers are too few for us to fight amongst ourselves. Thank you.
That's going to be a difficult one to follow. In fact, I could barely follow you through half of it, but that might be, that's my problem. That's not Robin's. Robin's a lot smarter than I am. And actually, he kind of made my point for me a little bit, too, and I liked how he kind of went through this whole complicated description of how we have disagreements and why we have disagreements, but made it real clear that ought to be very rare. I'm going to talk a little bit about Alaska. In Alaska, I think it is rare, but it's big things, unfortunately, we disagree on. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the jurisdictional things we have there. But I do want to point out that, you know, I've spent the last 30-some years, almost 34 years, doing this kind of work. And as Greg said, I've worked in the Southwest, the Northwest, the Northeast, pretty much every region of Fish and Wildlife Service except for 2 of them. I've been in Washington, D.C. twice, where I've had oversight over 2 different programs at 2 different times, and been in Alaska now twice. And it's always been clear that we can't do our jobs without working with the states, and the states are our major partners. And the whole thing about it's just common sense that we need to do that, just clear. Clearly we need to be making sure that we are getting along and doing things right. And I think I'm on this panel. I think John asked me to be on the panel. I wasn't sure at first, but I've worked with John for very many years. When I was in D.C. in the Chief of Refuge's job, we did get out some policies. The wilderness one was one that had been around for many, many years. And we did that working with the states. There were IPAs that were set up where folks came in and worked with us. And it was very, very difficult because there was lots of places where we had some fairly major disagreements. We had directors change, I think, 3 different times during the process of working on those, and they all had different ideas about what they ought to look like. Actually, I see Jane's here in the audience. Her husband Alan's out walking, having fun, but Alan was our solicitor I worked most closely with on that, and I think he would agree that it was very, very difficult getting to the point where we could get those policies out and get enough agreement between all the states, between them and ourselves, where we could get it done. It was a big, major accomplishment doing that. So, trying to make the point that it's not easy all the time doing these common sense kind of things, but we work really, really hard at it. And I think, again, Greg mentioned, that Sam Hamilton often made the point, for years I heard him say this, that there should be no daylight showing between us when we're working with the state on these projects, and I think that really tells the story very well. And I loved hearing about New Hampshire. New Hampshire is one of my favorite states. Beautiful, beautiful place. Those refuges are great places, and obviously the relationship there is great. Having said all that, so then in the world we live in Alaska, the state is clearly our most important partner we work with, but we've got some major, major jurisdictional disagreements that we've been working on for the last 3 years, which it's time I've been there, so I hope that's not some kind of indication of why we're doing it. It isn't. But major things. The polar bear was listed at the end of the last administration, and we've had litigation with the state over the polar bear. You know, we established the largest critical habitat anywhere ever before here in the last couple years in Alaska, and we have litigation on that. We had an issue, I'm not going to go into the details of any of these things, Unimac Island, where the state has very different authorities than we have, and they had concerns about the caribou herd declining there, where they believed that they had the authority to go into the refuge there and actually take wolves, doing predator control without going through a NEPA process, without agreement from us. And again, I'm doing a really simplified, version of this. We told them, no, you can't do that. They ended up actually taking us to court on that one, where and if I misrepresent this, someone can correct me, but I mean, the argument was essentially that we were actually hindering their ability to do their state-required wildlife jurisdictional things that they needed to do by exercising this authority, not letting them do NEPA. The court ultimately on that one said, yes, Fish and Wildlife Service does need to do NEPA. There'll be actions the state can take after you get through that process. Having said all that, you never want to go through those kinds of things. But, again, sometimes you have these jurisdictional changes. That is the world we're living in. The direction I give our people all the time, and I know that my counterpart, over at the state is doing the exact same thing to her people, saying, even though we're having these major jurisdictional issues, you can't let it go down and influence the way we do business with each other, because it's just way too important the work we're doing together. And the list we have of things that we're doing positively together is much, much longer, but it's not the big stuff that gets played out in the paper. So it's, unfortunately, it does seem to influence things, and we just need to do a really, really good job of making sure that we all understand, all our people understand, that the community understands that we are the best partners to each other. We do need to work together, and we will continue to do that. I had the opportunity to go talk to the Board of Game about the Unimac decision, and that was a very interesting process for them. They were very, very unhappy with me, but the board chairman actually, I thought, did a really good job of pointing out to everybody there, but part of the reason we have this is because our authorities are not the same. The state authorities are indicating we should do certain things. The federal authorities, under ANILCA, the Refuge Improvement Act, they're different. He got that, didn't like it still. But again, that kind of sets you up for that whole thing where you're constantly kind of working things out. But we'll get there. I also want to point out in Alaska, when LCCs were first established, 2 or 3 years ago, when we first started talking about that, a lot of the states had some major, major concerns. A lot of the western states did. And I think people were very, very vocal about that. And the state of Alaska was, again, one of the ones I think was most concerned about LCCs. But I will tell you that they came around. They worked with us. They've worked really, really closely with Cindy Jacobson, who we actually stole from the state, on establishing LCCs, and they're one of our best partners. Again, we don't always agree on everything, but they clearly have kind of stepped up and worked out a lot of those kinks, and we're clearly making a lot of progress in that area as well. So I guess my whole point is, I don't want to end this like on a kind of a downbeat kind of thing, is that we will have differences of opinion, we will have jurisdictional issues, but we have to continue to keep that relation positive, work together, and we can't do our jobs without doing that, and I think that's what we're doing. So with that, I guess turn it over to Greg. So thank you.
All right. I'm having like a debate with myself right now.
Oh no, not another one.
Actually, the debate with myself was more of a, does anyone have any follow-up from here on the bench that they'd like to make, or should we go straight to the crowd? I think we should go to the crowd. I'm seeing it. All right. So this part of the session was really to have a dialogue with all of you folks. Do you have issues that you want to talk about? Do you have questions you would just simply like to raise? Do you have, you want to ask our state counterparts specific things? Let's open it to the floor.
Wow, I kind of feel like, I don't know, other people in the audience might feel the same way, but feeling a little attacked working on a refuge after hearing everything, because I feel like we work really hard with our state partners day in and day out. We have state people in our office, and we are working side by side with them. Now, we don't, like you said, we don't always agree on everything, but I feel like the refuges now need some guidance from Washington or something on, if we want to go specifically on the hunting issue, let's go there. We need some guidance. Are we supposed to allow all hunting on refuges. I mean, we don't really have that guidance apparently because we're doing our CCPs. They're getting approved. They are saying that some refuges are having hunting, others are not, and that certain refuges that have hunting might only have this kind of hunting. And we are getting pressure from the states to have complete openness of all refuge lands to hunting in some cases. And so we're kind of in the middle between what we think the policy is and what the state wants us to do. And we're just, I mean, honestly, I feel like we are there for the wildlife. We are there for the future generations, but we need the guidance. I don't think it should be about who has control. It's about what's right for the resource. And so I think I need some guidance as a refuge manager, which way we're really supposed to go.
Yeah, John?
Just a quick response on the direction. I can't give that to you. That needs to come from this guy. But on your comment, feeling attacked, that concerns me if it's from the comments that we've discussed at this workshop. I tried to take out all the bold, hard criticism comments from this morning out of my talk just because of that. That's a joke. We're not trying to attack you. At least if that was directed towards the states, that's not the intent of this discussion. In fact, the whole point of this discussion today was to not talk about jurisdictional debates and let all of you know that we've agreed at a national level to a policy that we think is really good. I urge you to read that and look at it. I need to do the same with the states. It deals with that issue right off the top so that you all at the ground level don't have to mess with that. But having said that, Jeff's right. There's going to be times when we don't agree. But at least this provides a framework to work cooperatively to get to there. So we're not suggesting that you need to agree with the states on every issue on refugees. That's not my point. As far as direction to you, I'll leave that to Greg.
Well, I'm going to try that a little bit too. So I feel terrible if you feel attacked. I mean, I think the intent here was to make it real clear that, we're going to have some disagreements. We have to work together. Every refuge is going to have different authorities on whether, hunting is a good idea or not. I mean, certainly the Fish and Wildlife Service is a huge proponent of hunting when it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, then we're not going to do it. That's the issue you brought up. So, there's obviously lots of other ones. So I would hope the message here is one where, people do understand that we will continue to work together and we'll work through these things where there's differences. And if there's not clear enough, direction, I guess we can do a better job on that.
Thank you, Jeff. Robin, did you want to?
Yeah, and I see Jane ready to go here too, but I don't know whether you want to add or comment. But perhaps some of the reaction was to my comments. And the jurisdictional issue is the 800-pound gorilla. It'd be nice if it didn't exist, but it does. And somebody is in charge ultimately in the degree that someone gets the final decision. And if others don't like that, there's challenges. And that's why, I brought that up. The goal, and I think this doesn't really even need to be stated, is that it's a collaborative process and that we do have a relationship so that, sometimes we can agree to disagree. I mean, the states recognize that management on refuges is up to the refuge. But we do have strong guidance and policies that, strongly suggest that we listen to their needs and desires. And it may be something we don't want to do. It's hard, it costs money, it's inconsistent with something else we wanted to do. So we do have to apply all of our policies and things to that. And I guess what my encouragement is to the maximum degree we can when the states come in and ask for a hunting program that's consistent or a little different or to address a depredation issue or something, that we give them as much deference as we can consistent with our policies and guidelines as they exist and not just know that we can say no. So that's, that's all I was trying to get out of that.
Okay. Jane, you want to jump in?
I was just going to make a comment about the comment because I think I understood where it came from, or at least I was having some of those feelings because what the panel did was invoke Sam, and it's a powerful thing. The loss of Sam Hamilton was a powerful thing, and the statement was there should never be daylight between us and the states. And that's a wonderful goal, but there often is daylight. There often is conflict. I work at a level where the conflict comes to me a lot, and so I see the conflict, and so I think it could have been heard that it's up to the refuge managers to make sure there's no daylight between us and the states, and that can't always happen because we do operate under statute. We do have purposes. You each have purposes for your refuge. You each have to decide what's appropriate uses on your refuge. What the Refuge Improvement Act did for you was to tell you that there's 6 uses that are appropriate on refuges, and hunting and fishing are appropriate, as well as wildlife observation, education, interpretation, and wildlife photography. But then you still have to make a compatibility determination. You still have to look at, are these uses compatible with the purposes for which my refuge was established? And there's standards for doing that. And you do have to listen to the state, and you do have to hear their views and hear their advocacy for their position. But then you have the responsibility as the refuge manager to make that decision. And those are really hard decisions. And we do need to support you, and we do need to give you guidance, and we do hope that your partnership with the states is good enough and your back and forth with the states is good enough that those issues can be resolved at your level and don't end up in my office one day or in Greg's office one day. But it isn't easy. I mean, we know it isn't easy. And we know, you know, litigation can be a painful thing. I always say litigation is the thing that got Rosa Parks out of the back of the bus. So sometimes you have to sue. Sometimes states will sue us. Sometimes environmental groups will sue us. And that's how we get a better understanding of what the law is, because we go to the judicial system and they tell us. But this is a hard issue, and this morning, John, when I heard you on the issue of hunting and angling, but there's 6 big uses, and actually the vision talks more about hunting and angling than it does about the others. And there is also what you all have mentioned, which is the idea of trust. And I haven't gotten any indication from the service of any desire to diminish hunting and fishing or to move in that direction. And if anything, you know, the new director is proud of his hunting skills and his hunting dogs, and, you know, and the chief of the refuge system is pretty good at all that stuff as well. So I don't feel I don't feel that the vision is taking us in that direction, but I think, as Robin was saying, we have this history of, you know, going back and forth and who gets to do what, that it's really hard to establish that trust, and that trust begins with these people in the room. It begins with the relationship between the refuge manager and the partners, and you have a really hard job. So I just want to say, I work in DC, I work in the Assistant Secretary's office. I know you have a hard job, and you know, I hope we don't confuse it more than help make it easier.
Thank you, Jane.
Greg, can I just make
Let's go to Steve here.
Yeah, I'd just like to respond very briefly. You know, as I said in my talk, partnership is a two-way street. So there is a responsibility that space doesn't grow between the service and the states on the part of the states as well. What happens from time to time is these issues get political within a state. And oftentimes the state agency loses control of that discussion. When governors get involved, when senators get involved, when legislatures get involved. And so I'm not making excuses for the states, but I'm saying, you know, we have a responsibility, but at times it gets out of our control.
Thank you, Steve. And, okay, Carl's got it.
Just a couple of comments, and I think that the discussion starting early this morning with the comments that that were made in the speech this morning have actually been good, and they're things that I have heard, not just in other states, but also in the current state that I'm in. And the current state that I'm in Wyoming is kind of in a unique place with Fish and Wildlife Service, and the relationship that we have with the state has actually grown and been fostered. And I think that one of the things as managers of refuges is that we can hold states at an arm's length. We can keep them there, and we can use the Improvement Act to say no. And I think that we need to remember as refuge managers that, you know, wildlife don't care about boundaries. They have no boundaries. They go where they want to go, and they use the habitats that are available to them. And we have to remember that those habitats transcend the boundary. They go beyond that. And those wildlife will go wherever they need to go in order to survive. And so when we sit down with the states and we look at the issues and we look at what's going on, you know, we have to remember that, you know, there's a relationship that has to be built, and that relationship is built on trust. And there's things that have to happen, and there's things that we have to do as managers, and that information lies in the law. You know, the law tells us hunting and fishing. Consider it, look at it, and if possible, make it happen. And there's things we have to consider, like public safety and everything else. And so we do have a good relationship. We're working on hunt plans and improving those hunt plans and finding better ways to manage our habitats and take care of those things. So just to pass that information on to those folks, you know, we're doing a lot of cool stuff. You know, we're doing habitat projects. We're doing, you know, the state is actually doing a lot of things for us right now that otherwise we wouldn't be able to get done because we just don't have the tools that we need right now to get those things done. So where those relationships can be built, I think people will find that, you know, you'll get a lot more accomplished that way. Those I&M projects that need to be done on your refuge, look to the states. They sometimes have the people to help you get those things done. You know, the CCPs, bringing in the state action plans to look at, you know, critters that are important not only to the states but also important to the particular refuge that you're trying to manage. You know, those things are both ways. And so the states have a lot of expertise that we may not have, and they can give us that information, and they can help us define those objectives on how to make it better.
Thank you, Carl. Can you pass it back?
Yeah, I'd like to turn the conversation just a little differently, but it harkens to much of what's been said already. I was thinking about this session yesterday, listening to Jim Stone. He's talking about the Black Book Challenge, and you know, he was thrilled. He was talking about the 80-20. And he says, yeah, 80% of the time we're in agreement and we get hung up on 20%. And frankly, when it comes to Fish and Wildlife Service and states, I think we're doing better than 80-20. I think we're at 90-10 or maybe 95-5. And the small percentage of stuff that we disagree over, more often than not, we're able to work through. You know, it's pretty rare, Robin mentioned a few court cases, but it's pretty rare we go to court. We're at loggerheads so much that we can't come to agreement. And you know, I work in a regional office, and a lot of times I get calls from the field, you know, this is what's going on, what do we do? And it's, you know, mainly answers, we just need to work through it. We need to talk it through, and more often than not, we do. And I think that's something to be celebrated, rather than focusing on that 20% that Jim Stone mentioned, or it's 10 or 5 or whatever. But yeah, we don't always agree. We may not have no daylight, but there's not very much between us, and I think that's something to celebrate. And sure, we just need to work hard to reach agreement on the stuff that we're a little bit apart on, and more often than not, we can work through it. So let's just knuckle down and do that.
Thank you, Ben. Margaret, did you have?
Well, I just wanted to, I feel that sometimes my state field brothers and sisters and I are more in step than what the folks above us are. We often agree more often, and we put a recommendation forward, and it is changed. And so I mean, I feel very fortunate. I have state people managing 83,000 acres of LUP lands for me. I share a lot of my equipment with the state people who don't have it. Shared a lot more before liability issues, you know, got things in the way. And I felt we have a very good working relationship. And going back to the hunting issue, going through the CCP, and the first thing that I had out was my hunt plan, because I wanted to show the people that we were going to change some things. And it was very hard for me because hunting hadn't been real open beyond, regular deer firearms season where we were. And I'm an emotional person. And, 60 years before, do we, change things? But I had to separate out what is residential and what is not, and what is going to impact my management and what is not. And yes, we have a little bit more complicated hunting allowed on there, and it doesn't totally follow state rules, but it was a really good compromise. But I had to consciously separate out some of those things, and I was hoping the lawsuit they'd find out that I don't have any sharptails out there yet. They're my umbrella species for grassland, bird management. Are we succeeding? But, hunting was allowed. They didn't pick that up in the lawsuit. And hey, we have lots of sharptails right now. So it is hard to separate out, but I'll tell you, we are more in step with each other in the field than not. And I think we're managing the same resource, and we all have to work together because there's not enough to go around. So.
Do whatever you can to keep your bosses out of it.
Yeah, yeah. You don't want the politics to get into play there as little as you can.
The other thing I think, in asking the question, like some of the deer stuff that we had that our recommendations aren't always followed, is this recorded? It is. I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it anyway.
You want a timeout? Is that?
Well, no. It's like, for me, is a damn deer worth falling on your sword over? All I care about is enough deer to supply my 2 wolf packs that still get in trouble, and supply some hunting opportunities, and they weren't even there, pre-settlement. So, I had to, work through some of those things, but it's working, so.
Thank you, Margaret.
I just want to comment on a couple things. I think, even to go back and echo another point, I think the stressor, whether it's the refuge system or it's the state agencies, the stressor is we find ourselves trying to be all things to all people, and obviously we can't do that, and we try in places, but as a network of refuges, we do a great job partnering and working, but when we get down into the individual areas and the individual issues, that's where the hot stresses really come up, and that's why people get very passionate. That's why they get defensive. Having said that, I've always treated at least my relationship with state partners as we complement each other. Our lands are similar habitat types, but we are different, and we complement each other. You can do something on one, you can't do on the other, but there's a rational reason for both agencies making both of those decisions. So I've always treated it as a complement. When you look at a successful partnership and you see a nice map that shows all the habitat, whether it's in state ownership, federal ownership, private easements, they put it all usually maybe in different colors, but they don't say all these are managed exactly the same. They're all managed maybe for a common goal, but they complement. They're not carbon copies. And I can assure you, at least in my state, no WMA wants to be a refuge, and most refuges don't necessarily want to be a WMA. But we work so good together because we complement each other. So that's just what I wanted to add.
Thank you.
I just had a comment in thinking about this all in terms of the controversy, and sometimes, if we had some of the biology and the science behind our decisions, because our goal is to keep healthy habitats and healthy populations, that it would make our abilities to justify our actions a little bit easier, because we do get caught up in emotion. We do get caught up in communities and trying to make really tough, difficult decisions on whether or not you allow access to an area, you allow hunting on a species, et cetera, et cetera. And sometimes we just don't have that, and you have to use your best judgment, which is what we've given the power to, and we work with the state to get there. But I'm hoping that maybe as we go forward in the future, that if we can get more of the biological data and get some of the analysis behind it to show to the public and to bring that into the conversation, that maybe it will provide some clarity as to why we're doing what we're doing, and we have to evaluate that public content, but our mission is wildlife first, and we try to take care of that first, but we have a constituency, and that's our public, and without them, we will perish as well. So just a thought.
Thank you.
I thought I'd offer a somewhat different comment than what's been discussed so far, and it's spurred by Mr. Weber's recommendation that we explore state wildlife action plans and how we can further work together based on that plan. I'm someone who currently works for Fish and Wildlife Service in the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Program. And those of you who know me know that I spent 8 years at a refuge complex and also spent more years doing endangered species work. I'm fairly new in the Wildlife and Sport Fish Program, but one thing that is very clear to me is that the roughly $1 billion in funds that are offered through many different grant programs and are directly available to states can be utilized in partnerships between states and refuges in various innovative ways. So I would encourage you all to think about that. The grant programs not only offer state wildlife grants that are based on the SWAP plans, but there are many, many other grants that involve research, inventory, and monitoring, boating, endangered species, habitat restoration, restoring fisheries and wildlife in many different ways, and the list goes on. So when it comes to strategic planning and seeking funds, I would encourage refuges to talk with their state partners to identify what they have in common, where they can utilize funds from the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Office. For those of you not familiar with that office, it was formerly called the Federal Aid Office. So having been someone who's worked in different divisions, I see tremendous potential there. And Mr. Weber's right. We should tap into that potential more than we are now.
Thank you. Brad, did you have a?
The one comment I wanted to make is I heard a comment back there about concern about the resource and working with states, and from the refuge perspective, sometimes you may feel like you're out there alone trying to, work your way through some of those problems. And I wanted you to also think about going to your colleagues in the migratory bird program to help you assess, migratory bird issues when you're looking at hunting, especially migratory bird hunting on your refuges. We have cooperative programs with the states, with a lot of refuges for surveys, monitoring, and assessment, setting the regulations, and an over 50-year history of sitting down at the flyway and working our way through cooperative management. We have management plans for many of the species. Lots of them are at a larger scale than your individual refuge issues, but we can help you interpret the impacts of the seasons or those activities on your refuge within that larger context.
Thank you, Brad. Anyone else? All right, panel members. Oh, we got one. Is that Peter? I can't see back. Yeah.
I'm really interested to know what the panel has to think about widening the constituency. What comes up always is where there are conflicts, but I think that we need to think about ways where we work together to widen the constituency for wildlife, both the consumptive and the non-consumptive users. Maybe some people will collect data and other people will do other things, but the need to give particularly young people a more authentic wildlife experience, no matter what kind of experience they choose to have, and how the states can work more, how we can work more closely together to deliver those kind of experiences in an ongoing way.
All right, thank you, Peter. Good question. Anyone interested in panel? Steve?
I'll take a shot at it. I was at a facilitated discussion just before coming here about appropriate uses for the refuge system. And one of the things that we talked about at our table was this concept of using smart design to come up with, well, first off, having refuge managers take a little broader look at what might be a compatible use or an allowable use. Using smart design to try to do the best job you can to figure out how to put that on the refuge. Do that in the context of, at the same time, putting in place a monitoring program to monitor the effects of that new use, and then use adaptive implementation so that you've got, once you've got a track record established of what the impacts are, making the necessary changes to that to allow a broader use of people on the refuge. It's uncomfortable, there's no doubt. I was very impressed with the conservative nature of the refuge managers that were in the room. They are very protective of the resources that they have been charged with protecting, and that's laudable. Yet there was another lady at our table that said, if they can't use it, they won't love it, and if they don't love it, they're not going to protect it. Those are very wise words. She was from a friends group. You have to give people access if you expect them to support continued funding and support for the refuge system. So it's an uncomfortable and it's a difficult path. And from our perspective, I shouldn't say from the state's perspective, from my perspective, I've got some experience with this on the state level. We've put a policy in place. Basically, if there's a new use that people want to put on one of the larger pieces of conservation land there, it's incumbent upon those folks to help us come up with a way to adequately fund the implementation of that use, the monitoring of that use, and the enforcement of that use. So if there's groups that are looking to do new things on the refuge, you can put some of the burden back on them to help you make it happen. It doesn't have to all be service dollars, service personnel. It can be and probably has to be a coordinated, cooperative approach to increasing those uses.
Thanks, Steve. I think that's a good comment. And, you know, I think that we do struggle at times because we have uses and the uses that people are asking for, you know, may be in conflict with another use that is already occurring or that the state may want from a hunting standpoint or stuff. So it all comes out in that balance. And I think your comment about, you know, having some of your partners help you with that, I believe we do have policy guidance that actually gives our managers that sort of direction that, you know, in order to help you get to compatibility at some point in time, you may need to have some assistance and you can look for ways to get there, whether it be maybe the state even has a relationship with us in there that helps you get to compatibility in that case. So that's a good comment, and people need to consider that. Robin?
I mean, the core question, I think, on building constituency is vital, and it's woven in throughout the vision objectives with relevancy and strategic growth, and, you know, the public needs to understand us, needs to support us, or we will become non-relevant and eventually go away as an agency, and wildlife will suffer for that. So, you know, we enter into some interesting discussions on how much do you sell your soul in order to get support, and appropriate use kind of discussions are healthy, but that's kind of, they go there sometimes. The reality is, and I know from experience in a lot of years where we've had good, healthy debates in communities and with interest groups on wildlife issues, it's far more desirable and easy to deal with the acrimony around how to utilize a resource and try to restore it. In other words, you know, I've worked on issues where we've got depleted populations of wildlife or petitions for listing and that kind of thing, and those are tough. I almost laugh out loud when I get into a tough discussion where we're fighting over how to use the wildlife. You know, we got them. You know, if you want to eat them, you want to photograph them, you know, those are different values. But as a refuge manager, you know, that's really where we want to be. Habitat first, healthy wildlife populations, all wildlife-dependent recreation kind of falls in there. And as we kind of look at it, each refuge is different, each purpose different, each community structure and support, and each state's a little different. But we just have to look at trying to maximize the opportunities for the constituency too on those big six, and time and space restrictions and other things, because each of them are different too. And some child may never be a hunter, but is going to be a great advocate. Another one may only become a great advocate by, taking, birds during hunting season or something else. And so providing the maximum opportunity for people to discover those uses is really our challenge, and there is no solution. Innovation's the key.
All right. We have a new question. I see a hand up. All the way to the other side of the room.
Kind of take you down another trail, and that is cooperation, coordination between refuges and the states on endangered species, certain endangered species management. We've run into an issue with a candidate species that was listed as endangered under the state law, and they were managing it in certain ways on other lands, but when it disappeared in other areas and the remaining population now exists on a national wildlife refuge, we've had the same group of researchers come to us to want to collect and also do captive propagation, et cetera, for the species. And our level of, our policy under the Endangered Species Act, as well as, National Wildlife Refuge authorities, seems to have much more rigorous review and requirements, and so we denied a special use permit to go in and collect this species to do captive propagation because they didn't address any of the concerns that we had, and that was elevated to the state level. So I'm just as an example, but I wanted to just query the panel if there are any discussions or debates between the Fish and Wildlife Service and maybe AFWA or individual states that address how do we do endangered species management, whether it's state endangered species, federal, et cetera.
I'll try to respond, although I'm not familiar with the example that you provided, but I think that we obviously need to work very closely as we're discussing at this workshop on those species before they get listed. The states have a vested interest in that, as do the publics and all of our constituents. So I think that, how was resolution of that handled at the higher level?
It's still at that higher level. It's not resolved.
Not resolved, and the special use permit was proposed by the state?
The special use permit was actually submitted by a university researcher, but the state has been an advocate for that particular research because they've worked with them on that species, the butterfly species, for decades. And now the only population that they can access was on the refuge. And it's a candidate species under the federal ESA, so there we had to consult with ES.
Yeah, those challenges are going to come up. I don't have a solution for that. I think we just need to work as close as we can. And there's no better two other agencies in the world that need to work closely in terms of those species issues and listings. So need to work cooperatively. Steve, you want to take it?
Sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, John, you're on your own on that one.
No, I wish I knew more about the situation. I'm still a little cloudy on what it is that happened, but maybe we can talk about it, though, tonight or something.
All right. So we've got a couple of minutes. Do we have any last-minute questions for the panelists? I see Margaret's getting pretty antsy there with something. You have a question?
Yeah, you are on tape. You remember that.
I think a big issue that's coming, and maybe not to Alaska yet, and maybe not to Wyoming or out that way, but is the issue of lead, ammo. And I think, even amongst ourselves, I really feel that we should be looking at all our CCPs where we can use non-toxic shot. You have varmint shooting. There's plenty of evidence out there, scientific evidence, and we all have scientific evidence for a lot of things, and politics take a different role. But I think we should, state and federal, be working on how to look at this long term and try to get the ammo companies in there with us. I mean, I was around when, you know, we first went to steel shot for waterfowl, and, you know, we had to be sued to do it. And I think this is one of those issues that is going to be very important. It's going to be very tough. There's a lot of science behind that we need to be going that direction. And I think it would make a big difference out there. And so I'm just wanting to lay that bomb at your feet.
Let's drop that one and run kind of a deal?
Well, and we're aware of that.
Yeah.
The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and I think all the regional associations under AFWA are working on that very issue, together with the service and other cooperators.
And we would get broader-based support for some other groups, too. It's a health, you know, I mean, there's a whole combination of things if we could work on that together and get ahead of it a little bit, so.
And just in Alaska, we're actually working really closely with a lot of the native communities, trying to actually take, you know, make sure that they're not using lead. I mean, it's a long tradition for some reason of doing that, so I couldn't agree more. I mean, anytime we can take lead out of the environment, it's a good direction we ought to be working on. So, you know, we'll keep moving in that direction, I think. Recognizing there's lots of, you know, disagreement on that issue too.
Yeah, that one gets to political fairly quickly. It certainly does. Steve?
Yeah, there is a lead and wildlife working group. I think it's actually now a full committee within AFWA that has been working on this. And, but it kind of goes back to what the little girl said this morning. If you don't see the problems, you got to look closer, because it's a very complicated issue. There really is a lot there, and we're fully aware of all of the things. You know, one of the things that makes it difficult is it's hard for the scientific community to come up with a solid recommendation for an alternative, because there's issues with all the metals that you might want to put out there. It's not as simple as just getting lead out and then there's an easy substitute. It's not quite that simple.
Thank you, Steve. All right, so we're going to wrap up, be done with questions from the audience, but I'm going to give the panel members one last shot if they'd like to make a little closing statement or something. Why don't we just start right here with Geoff?
Okay. So just a quick one. You know, the first comment about feeling attacked, I've been thinking about that ever since I heard that, and I mean, I don't, hopefully that, I mean, I'd love to talk to you some more about that, because that was the last thing that we wanted to do here. And in fact, I was a little bit concerned about even being on this panel, because I was thinking, well, we do all these disagreements in Alaska, and I really, really wanted to make the point, though, that, you know, that there are the rare ones, there's the bigger ones that get all the, you know, kind of attention, and that I think we do have a great tradition of working together, and I think that's on both sides. I mean, I think our state counterparts and all our folks working on refuges and all of our programs, I think just do a tremendous job. So if we gave any other message than that, I mean, I apologize for that. And just, I mean, I want to make it real clear that this was meant to be, you know, we got some problems out there, but we're working together, and it's mostly very positive. So
thank you, Geoff.
Close up with that.
Steve?
I feel a little bit like Mr. Sunshine here today, but I do want to leave you with just the comment that we are all very privileged to be doing what we're doing. And I want to leave you with a story. Once again, back on the Umbagog National Wildlife Refuge, the last nesting pair of eagles in New Hampshire was in 1949. And there was a 40-year hiatus, and that was on what was to become the Umbagog National Wildlife Refuge. 40 years later, in 1989, the first pair of bald eagles returned to New Hampshire in the same tree as the last pair of bald eagles in the state of New Hampshire. If we build it, they will come, and we have a tremendous opportunity to do just that. And I just encourage everybody to work together to the greatest extent we can to make that happen.
John?
I'll just make it real quick. This certainly met my expectations for this workshop. As I said, they were pretty simple. I wanted to make sure that we all knew about our shared responsibilities and authorities, and that we have a policy that provides that guidance to our troops. So in that regard, I feel really good, because we heard a lot of good examples, except from Geoff, about...
So that's what you get for asking me on the panel. You'll never do that again, huh? Sorry.
Just a joke,
okay.
But true. But we heard about a lot of good things you all are doing, almost to the point where I think you were suggesting this panel was saying everything was broke. And that's not what this panel was trying to say. It's certainly not what I was trying to say. But I'll tell you, our employees, both your employees and the state employees, don't necessarily share the perspectives that we're discussing right now. and they also don't know about the guidance that's been established at the national level in terms of strategic planning. So again, as I said at the beginning, I encourage all of us to work with our employees so they understand the importance of State Fish and Wildlife Agency and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service shared common goals and responsibilities for conservation within the refuge system. I think that's very important. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Mr. West.
Well, just quickly, I mean, this conference is about the future, and so we talked a lot about the past. That's the way I guess we kind of learn. But one of the things that was mentioned by a commenter out here, and I've heard it before, and there's actually was a work session on looking lessons learned in CCPs. And I don't know anybody who really loves doing CCPs as a refuge manager. I know a lot of planners that kind of like to do it, but they're necessary, and the law says we're going to do them. We're going to be doing them basically forever. We got to be able to do them better. And so just to integrate the kinds of concepts that we're getting from this kind of work session into that, with looking at state action plans, mingling, you know, common habitat goals and objectives and that kind of thing. We want to do them quicker. We want to do them smarter. We want to save time and money. And so, you know, there's some exciting things, I think, for the future that we can make our lives better and be more successful for conservation.
Thank you, Robin. And as a follow-up to Robin's, and we're going to get the heck out of here pretty darn quick, is that I think we have room to grow in our comprehensive conservation plans, not from the standpoint of let's look at the wildlife action plans, but I think we need to start looking at sort of numbers of refuges within the same areas of large habitat areas, or perhaps the landscape conservation cooperative areas, and pull them under an umbrella type thinking of a comprehensive plan that is worked in with the state wildlife action plan, because the larger the landscapes we are working on and thinking on is the better we are going to be able to put conservation delivery on the ground. You know, I think that I've had a great relationship with the state in many of the places that I've been, and yes, we have had some of those controversial issues. I'm a person that personally says, I don't ever want anything to leave beyond my desk if there's absolutely any way I can make it work and resolve it, and we still stay with the appropriate uses, we still stay with compatibility, we still stay with the purpose for which we are, but in honoring and staying with what the state is trying to do and administer, and we've managed to get there. And, you know, we've worked hard at it at times. It's felt like it was like, oh my God, can it get any more difficult? And then all of a sudden, a little break and a little break, and you move in that direction, and pretty soon you're working on that successful sort of thing. But when I was called and said, would you come into Washington, D.C., and what's the most important thing that you could tell someone about sort of the successes that maybe you've had in the past? I said, it's simple. It's about relationships. And you heard from these folks that with trust and respect, you will have good relationships. With that, we need to probably move on and go to another session. Thank you very much. This was a good dialogue.